Hi art history students. Let's see if we can't get a quick little lesson in by video due to our technological problems. The first thing we're going to take a look at are some of the responses that you need to do for your AP test that will be coming up in the spring. The AP test has 6 written free response questions. 2 of those are 30-minute long responses and 4 of them are 15-minute short responses. So we're going to be looking at some step-by-step methods to construct a response. So we're going to analyze this particular response first. So here's the prompt. The image shows 2 views of the same architectural complex. Identify the culture in which the architectural complex shown was constructed. Identify the architectural complex in the image set that was constructed within the same culture, and then justify your attribution by comparing the 2 complexes using specific visual evidence. Use both specific visual and contextual evidence, and then analyze how both complexes communicate a sense of power. Okay, so take a look at these, and do they remind you of any other piece that we've seen that are part of our 250? If you said the Forbidden City in Beijing, you would be correct. This particular structure is the Temple of Heaven, and it was constructed by the same emperor that constructed the Forbidden City, Yongle. And he was part of the Ming Empire. So this is a Ming Dynasty Chinese work. All right, so we have identified the image in the image set that was constructed within the same culture. The Forbidden City was built in 1420 CE, and that's the same year that this particular piece was constructed. Okay, the next thing that we have to do is justify the attribution by comparing the 2 complexes using specific visual evidence. So take a look again at this, and if you can pull up an image of the Forbidden City, you can look at that. What are some things that you notice that are similar about these? Why was this one easy to identify as being culturally similar to the Forbidden City? Okay, you may have noticed that it's strongly geometric. This one focuses on circles, where the Forbidden City focused on rectangles, but they're both comprised of the geometric arrangements of spaces, and those form symbolic representations of heaven and earth in each of these situations. We have a terrace that has 3 steps that the temple is elevated on. They both have monumental gateways, and they're constructed of timber and brick. They're both constructed of the same materials, and they have similar stylistic lines, like these sweeping roofs. You can especially see it in the image on the right with the building in the back there. Glazed roof tiles, and they just overall look Chinese. Okay, so now we've justified our attribution by comparing them using visual evidence. This is what the 2 things look like. So we talked about the roof tiles, we talked about the geometry and the structure of the buildings. Now we're being asked to use both specific visual and contextual evidence to analyze how they communicate a sense of power. So we've described what they look like. Now we're going to tell what that means to people who view it. Okay, so what do you think? Think about the Forbidden City and some of the things that you know had to do with power in the Forbidden City. We've already said previously that the geometry, the circles and the squares, were representative of heaven and earth. They're spatial representations of political power. The round structure indicates heaven, and the squares are indicative of the emperor's power and the dictates and mandates of the law. There's also a symbolism with the number 3. You can see there's 3 tiers to this building. There are 3 steps, and 3 traditionally meant the union of the yin and the yang. So we also see on this, we have colors that are the same. We have the color red here, which indicates the sun. The yellow indicates the earth, and the blue indicates heaven. And all those colors are going to correspond to the 3 points of the compass, with the white marble piece being the 4th place, and that one indicates the emperor's power over all of it. There are dragons. You can't see them in the picture, but dragons are present in both of these pieces, and dragons are symbols of good luck and prosperity, and also symbolic of the emperor. So we have a link between the cosmic order of the universe and the rule of the emperor. He was the Son of Heaven. Okay, so you can see that throughout the things that I've mentioned here, I addressed each separate section of the prompt itself. Now, I have some pieces that we were going to work on together as a group, and we'll look at these next time. These are some graphic organizers to help you jot down the information that you want to include. So we'll use these next time. You begin by writing out at least 4 points that share a relationship between the two. And then you are going to, after you've selected those points, then you elaborate on each of those points to create your work. And this kind of an outline makes your writing more cohesive. Some other questions are going to ask you to look for influences. So in this particular case, I don't have a prompt, but this will be an example of an influence where you have 2 works here, San Vitale and Ravenna, and we haven't really talked about that one yet. This was constructed in 526. And then the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, which was constructed more than 100 years later. Now, San Vitale is a Christian work, a Byzantine work, and it's built on an octagonal plan, and it influenced the construction of the Dome of the Rock, which is an Umayyad Islamic structure. But the first Islamic structures were built with the similar floor plan to the Christian churches that were being constructed previously. Sometimes you need to compare themes. So there's lots of different ways that they present these. And here's a prompt that asks you to compare a theme. The work shown, and I'm going to show you a picture in a minute, the work shown is the gates created between 1979 and 2006 CE. In this work, the artists Christo and Jean-Claude transformed a specific outdoor location. Select and completely identify another work in which a specific outdoor location was transformed. Describe how each specific outdoor location was transformed. Use specific visual or contextual evidence and analyze both the similarities and the differences between these transformations. Analyze how these transformations shape the viewer's experience of each work. Again, we have a multi-step question here, and we need to include every one of these things in our final response. Now, they'll always give you works to pick from, almost always, and I've narrowed down the choices in this example to ones that we have seen in your lessons. So, the city of Machu Picchu, the gardens of the Palace of Versailles, and the Spiral Jetty are all examples of outdoor locations where things have been transformed. And so that's what we're looking for here. Now, let me show you a picture of the gates. I had the privilege of seeing this when it was up in New York City. It's orange curtains on metal frames all throughout Central Park. Now let's go back and look at some of these pieces here, and this was going to be our work that we were going to do together. Which of these do you think you could compare? The city of Machu Picchu, the gardens of the Palace of Versailles, or the spiral jetty to the work, the gates, as it applies to transformation of an outdoor space. So I just want you guys to think about that, and we'll work on that one next week. So remember to send your collaborative piece to me because we will be looking at those after Christmas. All right, so let's move on and talk for a minute about power. Think about our Capitol, and this is not our Capitol, this is the White House. But what messages are projected by the style of architecture that's used in the Capitol and in the White House? Why are the images from disaster movies like this showing some of our iconic buildings being destroyed? Why are those so powerful? It all has to do with power and dominance. We see our buildings in Washington, D.C. as a sign of our power, of our country's power, and when we see them destroyed, it makes us feel weak. So our essential question is, how is architecture used to convey power and dominance? Now, these pieces, I'm going to go through this kind of fast because nobody wants to listen to me talk that long, but this is Nan Madol, and in your lesson, you will see some information about Nan Madol. This is a outstandingly interesting place. It's built of these kind of naturally formed basalt logs, if you will. It was built between 700 and 1600 CE, so it's a little bit mysterious because European explorers did not come here until much later. And this is located in Micronesia, and it's from part of the Sodler dynasty. Now, I have a little video that, if we get a chance, we'll watch, that takes you around this, but these were man-made islands that were constructed of these stones, and there are numerous islands. I believe there's 97 of them, and each one of the islands had a different specific job. There were places for the servants to be, and then there's also a place for the king to be, and other chiefs. And what he did was the king moved these chiefs to this site so they'd kind of keep an eye on them and keep them under control. Everything was very regimented and separated, okay? And the use of large stones and the size of the complex indicated power, but it was also done by location in places that people could be, or people were allowed, much like we saw with the Forbidden City. Only people of a certain rank were allowed to be in certain places or walk through certain doorways, and so we have the same kind of thing going on here. These are two examples of power objects as well. This feathered headdress, said to possibly be Montezuma's headdress. It's a Maya or Aztec headdress. And then the Capu, never can get that one out, tunic that we saw from the Incas in South America. Remember that the Inca tunic, each one of these designs indicates a different job or position. And so a person who would have worn this tunic shows that they are over all people in all positions. So this was a piece of clothing that indicated someone's powerful status. The feathered headdress indicates a powerful status based on the fact that it's made of the feathers of the quetzal bird, which took a lot of feathers, so it was highly valued. Last week we saw Tepehi Kupe's portrait, and we talked some about this, and we saw how tattoos identified heritage, but they also show position in society. And so these facial tattoos would immediately tell someone who knew how to read them the important position that this man held in his society. The feathered cape that he wears and the greenstone earrings demonstrate wealth. These feathered capes took a long time to make and required a lot of feathers. He holds a weapon in his hand that also indicates power, but it's also ceremonial. And if you can see it on there, there's a little shell decoration down at the bottom. It looks like an eye. And this marks him as a man of manna. And we talked about that word before, and it kind of indicates status, importance, kind of like pride. It's hard for us to define that word. The feathered cape, the Hawaiian feathered cape, also is an emblem of high social status. This thing protected the status and manna. It symbolized protective power of the ancestors and marked the wearer as someone who was powerful and elite. Now here we're back at Nan Madol, and you can see how these structures are arranged. These are basalt boulders and prismatic columns that are found on the opposite side of the island. Nan Madol literally means the spaces between, and here you can see a map and an aerial view of this place. And again, each of these specific little islands and locations were designated places for people based on their social status. Okay, these large stones were floated here on rafts, and this is actually the royal tomb. So not only were there living people here, but they were also burying people here. Now, Nan Madol didn't last past 1600, primarily because of the difficulty of obtaining water and food and getting it to this area. What site is this? And what similarities can you find to this work in Nan Madol? It's certainly inaccessible and certainly allows it works with nature. There's also a division here of the wealthy and those that serve the wealthy, of the powerful and those who are not powerful. Here's the Forbidden City that we talked about earlier. When we saw the Temple of Heaven, we talked about the geometric layout of these places and the importance of geometry. Now here you can see in the Forbidden City that we have a series of rectangles. In Chinese, a rectangle, literally, the word literally means stretched squares. These rectangles indicated the boundaries of the law and that the emperor was going to uphold that law. It's meant to be a miniature map of the cosmos, with the emperor being the mediator between heaven and earth. Everything within the Forbidden City is symbolic of the emperor's role and his leadership of the people. The Palace at Versailles is another example of an architectural structure that was built in order to show power. Very similar to what we've seen with the Forbidden City and also with Nan Madol. So we can make connections with those two structures. This is the Palace of Louis XIV, otherwise known as the Sun King. At its height, this was the home of 10,000 courtiers of the king. Originally, the capital was in Paris, but the king relocated the capital or the seat of political power to Versailles. This building began as a small-ish hunting lodge, And then Louis XIV began this massive building program, and the gardens and buildings now cover 17 acres of land. The Palace at Versailles was begun by Louis Le Vau and Jules Hardouin-Mansart. And the structure began, well, it was originally an existing building, but the remodeling, if you will, began in 1669. And here is Louis XIV in all of his glory. Interesting little side note, he's one of the people who made high heels fashionable, but they were for men. Louis really had no problem with modesty, and he ruled for a very long time. He wanted to be associated with the sun, and so therefore he's frequently depicted as Apollo in many of the artworks found in this palace. And here's one here. One of the more famous rooms in the Palace of Versailles is the Hall of Mirrors. Glass was very expensive at this time, and mirrors in particular, and all of these mirrors were imported from Venice. It's been estimated, although we don't know for sure, that in today's dollars, this structure cost in excess of $2 billion to construct. Now, this was the home of the kings for quite some time, and Marie Antoinette had a little village built in Versailles that was for her own amusement. Now, she was not the wife of Louis XIV. She was the wife of Louis XVI, and that is when Versailles ceased to be the head of state and the home of the king and queen during the French Revolution. This is Marie Antoinette's bedroom there. And you'll notice that the bed is sort of surrounded by this little fence. There's all these little stools. Everything in court was highly regulated, and so people vied for the opportunity to just sit here and wait in case the queen needed anything while she was sleeping. The same was true for the king. So I want you to spend some time thinking today about two of the works that were viewed, and think about how they demonstrate power, both visually and contextually. Have a great week, and we will look at these in greater depth later. Bye.